Welcome to The Monk and the Man. Today we're going to talk about tribalism and how it affects humanity. So, I've noticed that society a lot of times is broken into two different parts. You either have two different parties. A lot of times polarities exist where you have one way of thinking and then another way. Now, there can be just two, or there can be many different perspectives, but a lot of the time people like to identify themselves into one specific area. For example, some of the things could be like sports teams. There's a lot of identity with sports teams. Well, people will become consumed with the sport, become very interested into the sport, and have a lot of emotion and passion. So I've looked at these things and I wonder, why is it that people feel so strong about sports? Why is it that people are so connected to things like patriotism? Another one would be that as well. So why is it that some people can feel so proud of their own country, which I understand in a lot of ways, but where does that come to a point where it becomes evil or an us versus them? You can see it in religion. Some people will take it very seriously and become very judgmental about people that don't think the way that they do. So there's a lot of times that I've noticed as society that we as people, we really are putting ourselves into groups and we're identifying with these groups. So today we're going to talk about really tribalism, how it affects us, reflect on that, and maybe we aren't so distant from our ancestors that we think, and maybe our brains haven't caught up to what we think. If maybe we aren't as humane as we think we are. So some of the things that we want to touch on is the history of tribalism. So as long as humans have existed, there has been groups that come together. One of the groups could be a tribe, really, and then you could have towns, and then you can have cities. So all of these together, they're really just ways that people come together to survive. There was a point where we were nomads walking the earth. We were still part of tribes thousands and thousands of years ago. Humans have been designed to be part of groups. This is embedded in our DNA, and it's still in our brains today. It makes sense. It really gave us a sense of belonging. When you're a part of something, you feel like you're a part of something bigger, and there's something that is deeply encompassed in our genes that when we are part of something, it feels very nice. There's neurotransmitters, which we'll get into later, and there's other parts of our brain, and there's many parts of our brain that are coming together when groups come together. We're not like cats where they can be by themselves. Humans are group animals. Now, those groups, when they come together, they can also create conflict. So, not just within the group I'm talking about, but with other groups. So, something to think about would be a town, and there's another town not too far away. There could be potential for conflict between these two towns or peace. some of the things that I think about would be really the instance of a tribe. So if you think about how a tribe is and how they might look at something from the outside. And a lot of movies will portray the tribes as being very violent, and many of them were. That doesn't mean all of them were, but there was definitely a sense of us versus them. That's where the whole term tribalism comes from. And it can create conflict, not just between two different tribes or two different towns, but also it can create conflict between people with two different religions, ideologies, viewpoints, political views, and even sports teams. So those are just some of the things I'm thinking about with tribalism. Now, why do you think that tribalism exists? What was the genetic advantage of feeling that us versus them mentality? Now, some of the things that if you think about, is that when people started coming together, they were able to help each other out, and they would start delegating tasks within their tribe or within their community. One person would be in charge of hunting, while another person might be in charge of gathering. Together, they come together to have more resources, more chances for survival. So the humans that were able to bring these things together, come together, that was a survival mechanism, something that helped us survive through these hard times that humans had to go through. So that's why it exists. It's there to help us find more resources. It helps create bonds. It helps, and I don't know what came first, the feeling that it feels good to create a bond, or just what's the motivation to come together is what I'm trying to say. Because it feels good, you have that bonding. People start, what was better, to feel good about something, bonding, or was it the benefit? So do you benefit from it and then we felt better? At what point did our brains start putting those two together, feel good chemicals with bonding? It's probably very, very early. If you look back, even chimpanzees, there's a lot of monkeys, anything in the group of animals that we're in, they come together in groups. I can't think of a primate that just walks as Earth solo. Now, when you're part of a tribe and there's other people in your tribe, you form a bigger tribe, and it comes together. Now, there's going to be other tribes as well that are doing the same. So when you have one group of people and another group of people and they come together in conflict, an extra person does make a difference. So not only did it help them to get their resources, but it also helped them in times of war, when two tribes were to come together to fight. And there's something deeply embedded in there. And I think that it is almost living still through us through sports, which is interesting. There's a lot of emotions behind that. They call it survival instincts. That means that it's so deeply embedded in our brains that we might not even be aware that it's happening. Isn't that interesting? When you think of an instinct, it's a subconscious thing. You might see yourself gravitating towards things and might not even be aware of your own tribalism. I'm sure there's things that I associate with that could be part of a tribe mentality. But when you're aware of it, it's harder to fall into those things. Now, definitely want to talk about the chemicals involved in the brain when this happens. So, one of the main ones that we want to talk about, I want to talk about three in general. One of them is oxytocin. Now, oxytocin is a chemical, a neurochemical in our brain that promotes bonding. It promotes loyalty. It promotes a sense of togetherness. There's oxytocin released when a mother is with their child. There's oxytocin released whenever you hug someone. There is these chemicals being released that are interacting with your brain. And these neurochemicals are rushing through your body, and they're going and they're interacting with your brain, making you feel a certain way. But something that as one doing research on this topic is that I learned that oxytocin also has a darker side to it. It can create suspicion about others. It can create a sense of judgment. So at the same time, on one side of oxytocin, you feel connected. But on the other side of that neurochemical, you feel distant. You feel suspicious. You feel like you can't trust the outside thing. That chemical is interacting with our brains all the time. Think about how you feel when you have a hug, or think about how you feel when you're around someone you care about. Think about what, if anything were to happen to the person that you care about, think about how you would feel if that person was in danger. I can see how oxytocin could have an effect, really. It's something interesting to be aware of. Now, another one that is important to talk about is dopamine. Now, dopamine they call the reward center, the reward part of your brain. It makes you feel good. And when I thought about this, I thought about its relation to sports. And at least I can think that for myself. When you're watching a sports team that you're a big fan of, you've been watching that team for a while, you really feel something. It's a team that you've been watching, or personally, I like to watch the UFC, so a fighter that you're excited to see fight. Some sort of competition. Could even be a chess game or a game, or something that you enjoy doing. But that game itself, when you win, there's a feel-good feeling. And when you watch that team win that you're rooting for, when you watch that team win, what do you feel? You feel a rush. I remember I was watching the World Cup, and it was a while back, and it was Germany versus Argentina. And I remember it was a long game and it was very close. And I was a big fan of Germany on that World Cup. And I remember being on the edge of my seat the whole time. And then as it went into overtime, feeling more anxious. Like, come on, score that goal. And every time that they would shoot, it would miss. And it would maybe just hit the crossbar. And I remember feeling those feelings. And though at the end, I think it was like the last 5 minutes of the game, something like that, they ended up scoring a goal and winning the World Cup. And I remember jumping out of my seat, feeling so wrapped up in the moment, feeling so happy. The team that I was rooting for since the beginning won the World Cup. So I'd imagine that there's many other people that have that experience when they are watching a sports team that they like, doing a competitive activity that you're into. That dopamine and how it relates to tribalism is strong. That dopamine rush when you see your favorite sports team winning takes over. It's an amazing feeling. It's a rush. So that's just another one of the chemicals that that our ancestors lived with. It's in our genetics to make. So that's oxytocin, that's dopamine. And the third one that we want to talk about is cortisol. Now, cortisol is known as the stress hormone. The hormone that makes you feel like if you had a cup of coffee in the morning, you might feel anxious. It's that hormone. It's something that is not pleasant. It's not a good feeling. It could put you in a state of flight or fight. Put you on the defense. And I think this is where the negative side comes into this. Whenever you're looking at something that is not part of your tribe, just be aware of that there could be potentially cortisol rising in your brain. Think about that. Think about the rivalry between two sports teams. You hear about the stuff that happens in the stands, groups of people attacking each other over what? People throwing a piece of leather out on a field for them to attack each other? What stresses are in their mind? What are the stresses in their mind, on our minds, when we think about people that are different than us? When you feel so strongly about something and you see someone who doesn't agree with that view, whether it be religion or politics, so many people have a strong sense within themselves that if you're not with us, you're against us. The cortisol is rising. It's going up. The stress levels increase. This could explain why it's easy for a lot of people to go to war, or easy for people to just get into that mindset of you're wrong and I'm right. And I'm stressed about it, more importantly. So just thinking about these three chemicals and how they play together really is something just to consider, because they're constantly interacting with our brain at different levels. It's not like just one goes off and the other one, or one goes on and the other one goes off. It's like a wave of these chemicals and different, it's like an ocean, and there's multiple waves, and we can feel one stronger after one action and then another one stronger after another. So when you look at what you're experiencing as a neurochemical reaction, it can help you understand it better. Maybe step away from it. Maybe to just, you don't identify with it as much. Maybe that's something that would be beneficial. Maybe that's why I brought this up subconsciously, because I want to bring up every part of this. And this is not just a social issue. It's a biological construct of ourselves that our genes have adapted throughout the years. It's amazing, really. So just thinking about tribalism and some of the ways that it affects our neurotransmitters, we can start at a very subtle level of real life examples of tribalism. Some of the examples we've already talked about are sports. The fans of the sports feeling engulfed within their team, feeling proud to be part of that team, feeling like the other team is their rivals, or the other country or the other ideology is their rivals. It's all general, but in sports, you can see it. You can see the dopamine rise with the victories. You can see the oxytocin when they come together. Or if you meet someone who enjoys the same sport or who enjoys the same team, there's a sense of camaraderie there. And it's strong. So I think that thinking about that is something interesting, especially if you think about two people, they just meet each other and one is a fan of one sport, not necessarily one sport, but one team, and then the team's rival, the other person is a fan of the team's rival. That's so, oh, you're a Patriots fan, or oh, you're a Chiefs fan. Like, there's a little sense of there of like, jokes, but maybe that is deeply embedded in something else there, a little deeper. Now, another aspect of tribalism that could be considered is religion. Now, you could say it's a definitely more harmless version of it, but religion does create a strong sense of belonging, feeling like you're a part of something. That's why a lot of people like it. You're a part of something bigger. There's certain rituals that you can do within the religion that other people within that religion do as well, which bring you closer together. That's saying essentially we have a genetic part of us that wants to be religious. It's a sense of belonging. It's a sense of togetherness. And like any tool, there can be positive parts about it and there can be negative parts about it. So we all know what some of the negative aspects of it could be. Just judging someone based on their religion, a form of prejudice, religious prejudice, or automatically hearing like, oh, you're that type of person. I remember I have an aunt or an aunt, or however you want to call that, and I was having one of my friends over, and we were just having casual conversations, and she is a very strong believer in Christianity. And I'm not going to mention her name, but there was the conversation was going fine. It was great. And he went to the kitchen and she was on the table. And then the conversation about religion started. And I could tell she was starting to get into it. But at some point in the conversation, of religion, it was brought up to my friend. It was brought up to my friend. The topic of religion was brought up to my friend, and I jokingly said, "Oh yeah, it's because he's Muslim." And I remember just looking at her reaction in her face, and she was almost in disbelief. She was like, "No, he is not a Muslim." And then what's funny is that he kind of went with it. He's like, "Actually, yeah, I am a Muslim," because he saw that reaction. And I think that's just a good example of the defensiveness that can exist within religion. And that's just one example, but think about the wars that have been started because of religion. Think about that sense of the cortisol that's releasing when if you're strongly religious, and you might come across someone who is strongly religious in a different way. I believe that's something that's very real. And I think it's something to consider when in discussions of tribalism. Another harmless aspect of tribalism would be things like high school cliques. We all know that when you're younger, there's cliques in high school. There's the jocks, the nerds, the preps. At least that's how it was when I was in high school. And I remember just in the morning, just seeing the groups of people together. And it really was interesting now that I look back on it, because they would all dress the same. They would all kind of talk the same, have similar mannerisms. And, if I think about that too, that was a form of tribalism. And it's very ingrained in us. It's ingrained in us, even at a younger age. And I think I don't know when it starts. Maybe because I don't think about kids forming their own groups. But then I think about maybe when you're in middle school or high school, definitely. I mean, there's whole movies about this. Mean Girls, I think, was one. But it's definitely something that is a thing. So I think just that's another example to think about in tribalism. Thinking about what it is, what's going on there. And those are just more some of the quote-unquote harmless versions of tribalism. But there is a darker side to it. And it starts with things like gangs. So there's a lot of places in the world where gang violence is a thing, and it's very prominent, and there's a lot of gangs. Luckily, I haven't experienced much of that, but I do know that they'd like to target younger people to join their gang. And that's probably the perfect person for them to target, because they're vulnerable into wanting to become something bigger. Especially if they don't have a father in their life. Now they have a group of men, usually in the gangs, that are saying, "Oh, we're together now. We fight together. We party together. We are brothers." For some reason, that just made me think about fraternities as well, but that's another. Really, there's a lot of different ways in which tribalism, I think, that gene is affecting us. But that identity with the gang, that identity really can havoc many things. In jail, there can be a lot of fights because, oh, well, you have this color, you're wearing that color, and I represent this color. It's so innate. It can be found in so many different areas. And there can be some horrific things that gangs do to other gangs just for wearing a certain color or representing a certain part of that city. What turns off in our brains, in humans' brains in general, that when you look at someone that is not you, but is also a threat, it almost makes it okay to do these violent activities. What's getting shut off there? Why does that group mentality bring us to those violent decisions? in looking at a us versus them, they're the outsiders, they're the enemy. I guess when you look at something like that as an us versus them, or they're the enemy and we're on the good, not necessarily, you don't even have to be good if you're a gang, but we're on that side of things where it's us versus them, and we can do whatever we want to them because they're not us. And then the other gang has the same mentality. And then the violence just propagates more and more and more. That's a really sad aspect of this. And it's something that I am sorry for anyone that has lost anyone through gang violence. So, and that just also relates to another topic, which is war. How different are gangs within cities compared to countries on the world? What's it gonna take for people to come together? Sometimes I think about, well, maybe if there was another planet or aliens and they came, and maybe then we would be part of the Earth team, right? We'd all come together and be one. But this is not how it is. I think wars have killed more people than disease. Fact check me on that, or it could be the other way around. I know disease is pretty bad, but wars? How many people have died from wars in the history of humanity? I don't even need to speak about this. This speaks for itself. The us versus them mentality is dangerous. Now, I understand if you have to defend yourself. But at what point is it okay to kill? If the war is about something, is it about defense or is it about other things, capitalistic things? We don't know. Sometimes they're main reasons, but it's easy to see how that could combine for that. A sense of, maybe it becomes a sense of nationalism. Maybe it becomes a sense of pride. You feel very proud of it. And then that pride could make you think that the rest of the world needs to be like us. And then when those conflicts happen, like the bigger wars, like World War I or World War II, it even gets more divided within those countries. Then all of a sudden they take sides. So I don't need to speak much about this because war speaks for itself, and it's one of the most evil things that humans have experienced in general. So, I do want to make it clear though that there is positives to being proud of where you're from. I'd say we're oxytocin, because you feel like you're bonded. You're a part of something. Feels good, right? It feels good to know that we're together. But are we really? That's the real question. Are we really together? You have to be a Democrat, or do you have to be a Republican? You choose. Because if you don't choose, then your vote doesn't count. This tribalism can be seen wherever humans exist. It can be seen in politics. It can be seen in sports. It can be seen at schools. It's hardwired in us, and it's obvious. Think about it. Think about what ways you have been hardwired. What elements of yourself are tribalistic? We're these Homo sapiens living in this modern world, but tribalism is not a modern problem. even call it a problem. Is it a problem if it helps you feel good and come together? To come together to make a stronger society. Like anything, it can have its positives and it can have its negatives. But if you're not aware of it, then you can't make that decision. Start with awareness. Start with seeing the tribalistic parts of yourself. Some of the best ways you can do that is just to meditate. Just sit there, breathe, think about it. Whenever you feel that thing that is us versus them, or I don't like that other thing, think about why you don't like it. Think about what biases you might have towards it. You wouldn't want to overpower the bonds that you have within your ideologies and exclude someone else's. You want to make them feel, you want to listen to what other people have to say. And that doesn't mean you need to change your mind, but it doesn't mean that they're the enemy. Inclusion is what they call it. So, if you value that sense of belonging, that's great. It's helpful. It's a strong thing. It's needed. It's inevitable. You feel that connection with the people that you're the closest to, like your family. You would do whatever it takes to defend your family. But just keep all these things in mind. These are just some reflections on tribalism and how it affects us today. Thank you very much, and hope to see you soon. Bye.